Good morning, everyone. My name is Sari Hanafi. I am the director of the Center for Arab and Middle Eastern Studies on behalf of this center and the Department of Political Studies and Political Administration, PSPA. I would like to welcome you all and welcoming our fellow on the center, Professor Emeritus Selim Deringil. Just a few words about him before we give him the floor for his talk about the tale of two colleges, our UB and Boğaziçi University, who started almost at the same time. So, as I said, he's a professor emeritus at the Boğaziçi University and currently affiliated at UB. Just to mention his last books, The Ottoman, the Turk, and the World Power Politics, collected essays published in 2000, Turkish Foreign Policy During the Second World War, and Active Neutrality, published in 2004 in Cambridge University Press, and another book, The Well-Protected Domains, Ideology and the Legitimation of Power in the Ottoman Empire, 1876-1909, published in 1998, and which was awarded that Turkish Studies Association found Kuprolu Prize in 2001. So I give you the floor, Selim.
Thank you. Yeah. Do I have to talk into this?
No, or that. Yeah. Okay.
Hello? Is this working?
Yeah.
Hello? I'm not sure this is working. Hello?
Okay. So can you use this? Yeah.
You can put the mic in the stand, bro. I can.
No. Sorry. We will resolve it. Just 1 second.
So I don't have to hold it.
Yeah. I will hold it.
Yeah, don't hold it. If we
I will.
closer,
Yeah, but this was.
No, it doesn't work.
It's working, it's just not really loud. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank Professor Syria Hanafi for affiliating me with CAMES. And I would also like to make a special point of thanking Samar Mikati of the archives, the AUB archives, for making life very easy for me when I was doing my research in the AUB archives, and of course her wonderful staff. Now, before I begin, I have to give you a little bit of background. I taught in Boğaziçi University, well, I'm still teaching there part-time, for 35 years. And then after I retired, I came here to Beirut, and I taught actually at AUB for 2 years. So I've actually taught in both of these institutions. So before I move on, I just want to give you my basic research question. It's not changing the slide. The slide isn't working. To click in. Okay. Okay, my basic research question or questions are the following. How do the Syria Protestant College and Robert College fit into the overall picture of educational transformation in the Middle East in the 19th century? How did these two institutions articulate with the two societies that they're host societies, if you wish, Ottoman, Turkish, or local Arab, or we can also say Istanbul and Beirut? Robert College, or RC, as we shall continue to call it, and SPC, Syrian Protestant College, were both chartered in the city of New York and both founded by American Protestant missionaries. RC opened its gates and enrolled students first time as Bebek Seminary in Bebek in Istanbul in 1863. Syria Protestant College opened its gates in 1866. So we're very proud of being 3 years older. Governor Seymour of New York City, of New York, jointly approved their incorporation on the same date, 14th of May, 1864. And according to Bayard Dodge, the president of one of the presidents of Syria Protestant College, this made them not sisters, but twins. Okay, now we have a few critical issues that I want to discuss with you. What I'm going to do first is put these two colleges in the broader perspective of transformation in Ottoman education in the 19th century. The critical issue, of course, was conversion of Muslims. The missionaries were the first serious American presence in the Ottoman domains. The first Protestant missionaries actually openly declared that they wanted to convert or work, as they called it, among Muslims. Later, they switched to what were called Oriental Christians, the Greek Orthodox, the Greek Catholics, and the Maronite. Now, of course, this was not seen in a very nice way by the Ottoman authorities, as you can imagine, but it was also seen very badly by the religious authorities, the patriarchs of these churches, because they said that they're poaching on our flock. In the end, this was a very short-lived policy. There was another issue, of course, which I've written on, but I'm not going to go into here because of time constraints. As you know, the punishment for apostasy in Islam is supposedly death, right? This is a problematic issue. How far it was applied, how far it was not applied. But if you wish in the Q&A, we can go into it, but I'm not going to go into it here. Whether this was instrumental in the missionaries changing tactics, probably. But what they did was they shifted to education, right? They shifted to schooling. Syria Protestant College becomes AUB in 1920. These you know. Because I showed this, I gave a previous version of this talk to my Turkish audience. That's why I put College Hall in here. Now this is Robert College becoming Boğaziçi University in 1970. And this is the campus. We still have the same campus. It's very beautiful, actually. And you have the Bosphorus behind it. Right, so if any of you have been to Istanbul, if you go up the Bosphorus, going from the city to the Black Sea, there's a huge fortress on the European side, and the college the university now is right behind the fortress. Okay, so in fact there was an overlapping of personnel. In fact, also George Washburn and Daniel Bliss. George Washburn, the second president of Robert College, and Daniel Bliss, of course, the founder of Syria Protestant College, were friends. And as Washburn says in his memoirs, the fourth year of Robert College was the first year of Syrian Protestant College founded in Beirut under the presidency of Daniel Bliss, an old college mate and a dear friend of mine. It was the first fruit of the influence of Robert College in leading to the foundations of similar institutions in all similar fields. So these basically they were the same sort of personnel. They knew each other and so on. Very close friends. I'm just going to show you a few views of the campus and just to show you how similar, even in construction, in architecture. This is one of the founder, of course, was Cyrus Hamlin. This building is called was called Hamlin Hall. Now it's because it's a Turkish university. It's called very sort of straightforward. The Faculty of Administrative Sciences. Albert Long Hall. This is the one that looks the most like College Hall, I guess. It's now simply called the building with the clock. This is a view of the campus taken from up high. This is our central quad. We're going to see it in a very different context in a little while. These are all names of important missionaries, just like here. You know, you have Fiscal, you have whatever hall, West Hall, which we're in, Anderson Hall, he wasn't actually a missionary, he was somebody who gave a lot of money to the college. This is now called the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And if you follow the cursor, is the cursor up there? Ah, no cursor. Oh, wait. All right. The room from where you're sitting, the furthest left on the top floor used to be my office. Okay, Bebek Seminary opened its doors on the 16th of September, 1863. The catalog was printed in English, French, Greek, Armenian, and German, but not Turkish. Okay, and these are the early founders. The cursor isn't working, so I can't show you. This is the first person to found this college. His name is Cyrus Hamlin. There he is. This is George Washburn, the second president. This is Caleb Gates, who was president of very critical years when the Turkish Republic was founded, 1923-24, and we're going to come across him again. Very important, very critical figure at this transformational stage. And this is Mr. Money. This is George Robert, and he became the major financier, and therefore the college was given his name after the 1870s. Okay, again, some background. The Ottoman state becomes an educator state. In the 19th century, education became a weapon of mobilization, as you all know. Mobilization of nationalists in ideology, or indeed a sort of what has been called imperial nationalism. So in this century, states become what you call educator states. And we know the very famous classic book of Eugene Weber, Peasants into Frenchmen, where he wrote about, they discovered that as late as the 1870s, the great majority of the French population did not speak French as a first language. They spoke the local patois, they spoke the local dialect. So the French government, the French state, launched this mass mobilization of primary school teachers to teach the kids French. Anyway, so that's the classic background. So what you have is competition over the young minds of the future. And education is linked to national prestige and ethnic prestige. It became a question of somebody creates a school, opens a school, you open another one. So in fact, the Université Saint-Joseph here, which opened its doors in 1875, was created to some extent as a response to Syria Protestant College. Okay, this is I don't like to read documents at length because it bores people, but this is a particularly critical one from the Ottoman archives. It's to deal with the official line on how to deal with the threat, if you wish, of foreign schools. It says here, in order to compete with the American and French schools in Beirut, and in order to prevent Muslim children from attending them and saving them from the clutches of the Protestant missionaries and Jesuit priests, it is necessary to create an institution which can compete with them. The schools of the missionaries have since many years branched out and ramified. The Vilayet of Beirut has informed the palace that the land for the construction of the School of Science and Trades has been acquired, and the funding has been rapidly found for the construction of the running of the self-same. The construction will begin in the near future, and imperial order has been issued commanding the discussion in the cabinet. So this is the Mekteb Sanayi, right down the road, which is today, half of it is the National Library, and the other half belongs to the Ministry of Interior. And the building is very much there, and I'm sure you've all walked past it or driven past it. This is the inauguration ceremony. Now, there are three critical events that I want to discuss with you today. My question is, basic question is, what sort of education was offered in these two institutions? What sort of education? And not only that, how was this education internalized by the student body? Was it taken hook, line, and sinker without question? Apparently not. We have two, in fact, three cases of student protest. We have one Armenian student protest in Robert College, and we have two here. We have the famous Darwin Affair of 1882, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And then we have the Muslim student revolt of 1909. So first, the Armenian revolt in RC. A revolt is maybe too strong a term now that I think about it. 1873, the Armenian students, which formed a large block of the student body of Robert College, protested that they were being pressured into converting to Protestantism. They refused to attend Bible classes or accept any sort of quote-unquote religious instruction, and their families supported them. This was quite a big issue at the time for the Armenian community in Istanbul, because it's a very closely knit community, and the Armenian nationalism, as it later became known, was only just starting out. So it wasn't a question of nationalism as such, but it was more like I guess it could be to some extent, but it was more religious. And they wrote a long letter. The students wrote long letters in the local Armenian press saying the following: finally, we advise our people not to be deceived by the program of the college, and assure them that if they send their sons there, they will be making them Protestants. There will be means of making. The 26 Armenian students were expelled. Ultimately, the revolt failed, and the Armenians continued to form one of the largest groups. The next, chronologically speaking, is an ex-SPC, the Darwin Affair. Professor Lewis was dismissed openly by the administration for teaching about Charles Darwin. Many students and faculty protested, and some students were expelled. One of these, of course, was the famous Georgi Zeydan, who later became one of the major publishers and thinkers of Pan-Arabism. And Georgi Zeydan says the following about, this is from the AUB archives: the Darwin Affair actually failed. I mean, the guy was rehired, but it was not a big success. He says that the movement with which the students of the college came to the fore is worth recording because it started a new awakening amongst the students of the schools of the East. The merit for this is again due to the education in this very college, since it educated its students towards freedom of thought and speech and accustomed them to individual freedom and equality of rights. Now, here I want to come back to this whole question of what do students do with this education that they are given. In both the case of the Armenian students in RC, and also the case of the students here during the Darwin Affair, and immediately I'm going to come to the next point, the Muslim students of SPC, what these kids are saying is, okay, you've taught us free thought, you've taught us free speech, now this is what we want. So people are given tools, right? People are given intellectual tools, but there's no guarantee that they're going to use these intellectual tools in the direction you want them to, right? So in fact, in both of these institutions, you have these student protests, and later on, as the years go by, the SPC becomes becomes AUB. It becomes the center of the Palestinian, one of the centers of the Palestinian intellectual resistance. Robert College, Boğaziçi University becomes one of the centers of Turkish leftism, and Boğaziçi, after it became Boğaziçi University, actually, right? And to this day, it remains an institution that is very proud of its liberal, critical thinking sort of background. Now, Muslim student revolt in SPC in 1908, 1909, the academic year, in this academic year, the enrollment of 876 students, this is from the AUB archives here, 128 were Muslims, 88 were Jews. And in the summer of 1908, the administration of SPC received letters from the parents of the Muslim students requesting that their children be exempted from Bible classes and other Christian religious activities. I have to say at this point that although in these institutions open conversion or proselytizing was not actually carried out, but these kids were bombarded with Protestant teaching, Bible classes, obligatory church attendance, and so on and so forth. So this was also the case. The student revolt actually becomes an international incident. The students sent petitions to the Sultan as Caliph, right? Because, as you know, the Ottoman Sultan was also the Khalifa-i Muslimin, the Caliph of all Muslims, and the American ambassador. The student cause was taken up by major intellectual figures in Beirut, like Muhammad Bayhoum, Salim Salam, and as I've already said, Georgi Zaidan. There's another aspect to this that I didn't put into the slide because it becomes too sort of contentious. The Muslim street here in Beirut was also up in arms against this teaching of Protestantism. And there was a very real possibility that there would be violence against the campus. Right? So it becomes a very heated affair, much more than the Armenian dispute in Istanbul, for reasons I'm going to explain. Bayard Dodge, he's in America at that time, by coincidence, and he's a good friend of President Roosevelt. So he takes the matter right up to President Roosevelt, and Roosevelt encourages the authorities, the school SPC authorities, to be flexible, because they don't want an international incident, which there's a possibility, of which there's a possibility. Now here, I can't use the cursor, but the two figures encircled are Daniel Bliss and then Howard Bliss, who became the president after his father died. His son was, Howard Bliss was his son. And this is a photograph taken in front of, what was the hall? Fisk Hall? Fisk, right around the corner. And these are Muslim students together with their president in 1909. So evidently, peace was reestablished. This is from the AUB archives. Matter ends in stalemate in 1909. The college agreed not to expel the Muslim students for, as I said, fear of repercussions. They allowed them alternate religious ceremonies. So out of 220 protesters, only 8 actually left the school. So we return to the basic question. When do foreign institutions, foreign schools, supposedly stop being foreign, right? Because the Ottoman state was reacting to these institutions as foreign, right? So the question I'm asking in my own work, and I'm inviting you to reflect with me, when do they stop becoming foreign? When are they no longer foreign? They might teach in a foreign language, or English in this case, but what sort of graduate do they aim for? You sort of trying to create some form, train some people in a certain mold. Does it work or does it not work? And as I said earlier on, the profile of the graduate does not necessarily suit the aim of the missionaries, in fact. Right? Okay, comparisons between the two institutions. SPC had a much more significant and profound impact on the history of Beirut, Lebanon, on the Arab world. This is without question, than RC had in Istanbul during the Ottoman Empire. Right? SPC was a much more impacted, far more in a far more important fashion than the RC. Many of the leading figures of the Nahda, Georgi Zaidan being one of them, were actually SPC graduates. Later on, many of the leading lights, actually, of the Palestinian resistance movement, George Habash, 1951, top of his class, graduated from the medical school, right? Leila Khalid actually attended the university. She didn't graduate. And I know the list goes on and on and on. Whereas, so what's the reason? Why was SPC so much more influential than Robert College was at the time? Boğaziçi University, when it's interesting that after it's transformed into a Turkish state university in 1971, after that, it goes in leaps and bounds. Even before that, actually, I'm going to show you a slide later on. With the arrival of the Republic, with the secular Republic of Turkey, there are more and more and more Muslim students attending. Okay, let's move on. As I said, SPC was much more integrated. One of the most critical issues, of course, is the language of instruction. In SPC, the language of instruction was Arabic until 1879. Right? In Robert College, the language of instruction was English. And to this day, at Boğaziçi University, we teach in English as language of instruction. SPC faculty was mixed. You had locals and Americans. RC had hardly any Turkish faculty until after the declaration of the Turkish Republic in 1923. This is from Washburn's memoirs. These are from Boğaziçi archives. The table giving the number of nationality of students and graduates each year for the first 43 years. Categories: Armenians, Bulgarians, Greeks, and others. No separate category existed for Turks. 6 Turks enrolled in RC in 1872. And even more strikingly, in the first 40 years between 1863 and 1903, out of 435 graduates, only 1 was Turkish. We can discuss this later on in the Q&A for why this is. I have some ideas about that. And this is from the AUB archives. In 1909, out of the 876 students, 242 were Muslims. That's like 27% of the student body. The first Muslim graduate of SPC was Hallak Salim Muhammad, who got a BA in 1873 and then graduated from the medical school in 1879. Mithat Pasha Street, Sharia Mithat Pasha, right out there, was Bliss. Was Sharia Mithat Pasha. It became Bliss Street in 1921. And of course, this is another interesting point. It would be inconceivable today to have like a Hamlin Street in Rumeli Hisar, where the university is situated. It's just, nobody would even think about it. No, it's a very different context. Interestingly enough, there was a joint newsletter between the two institutions until the early 30s, I believe. As you can see here on the left, it's outlined, Robert College of Constantinople, and also interestingly called Constantinople. And on the right, it says American University of Beirut, 1921. This is from the archives here. And it says delayed war obligations. And here you have, we don't have much contrast, but it says Sharia Bliss, as you can see, obviously. And I looked and it's disappeared. Apparently, there were marble plaques along the street because it was renamed Bliss Street in 1921. And this article explains why. It says that because Howard Bliss dies in 1921, and it said, this is the article in the newsletter, that he was very well loved for his famine relief efforts during the war. So that's why, as a gesture of thanks, as it were, this street was named Bliss Street. After the declaration of the Republic in Turkey in 1923, the number of Muslim students in the Robert College increased very rapidly, like exponentially, mostly engineering. This RC was very strong on engineering. Here it was always medical school, whereas there was never a medical school in RC, and then later on, Boğaziçi never had a medical school. But engineering was always like the top. The nationalist movement kept a very close watch on these so-called foreign schools. One of the sort of aspects of the nationalist backlash in the Kemalist early republic, like 1920s, 1930s, was it maintained the foreign schools, but they kept very strict watch on them. Their curriculum was very cautiously, very carefully vetted. If there was one, foreign teacher, they had to have 2 Turkish teachers. It was this very obvious backlash. Now, this is from Caleb Gates, again from the AUB records here. Caleb Gates was a very critical, he was president of RC at a very critical conjuncture. And that was just when the war was fought against the Greeks and the new Turkish Republic was being born. And this is what he has to say. The Turkish government is not disposed to allow foreign ambassadors and ministers to intervene on behalf of the schools of their nationalities. The heads of these schools are now required to have their dealings directly with the Turkish officials. At Lausanne, İsmet Pasha, who is the Commissioner for Foreign Affairs, as well as the head of the Turkish peace delegation, gave the strongest assurances that his government desired the maintenance of American schools and they would favor their work. Now, this is İsmet, there's the chap on top. This guy was, as you know, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's #2, and he in fact became the Turkish president after Mustafa Kemal died in 1938. And this newsletter is really amazing. It's openly like sort of laudatory towards İsmet, because they say, because they want him, they want his good, they want him to like them, and they say he's wonderful and so on and so forth. In fact, İsmet was very, very anti-foreign. Right? He was very, very anti-foreign. He was one of the most radical, if you like, members of the Kemalist regime who, in this regard. Here we have a funny one. I have to explain this, and I wish I could use the slide cursor. Now, the chap I've circled in the middle, his name is Hüseyin Cahit Yalçın. He is like one of the most powerful commissars of the Turkish regime in the 1940s. It was a single-party state until the 1960s, until 1960 actually, right? Hüseyin Cahit Yalçın is a deputy for Istanbul, and he is also the publisher of the official Ulus, which is, I guess, you would have to sort of compare it to the Pravda, right? Extremely powerful guy. And here he is posing in the center with the president of RC on his right. And this is the graduating class, engineers of 1943, in the middle of the war, right? Turkey's on the brink. Everybody was wondering which side Turkey is going to fall. But one of the ways in which it's a very interesting decision. It's a shame these are the guys in uniform, the young men in uniform, are Turkish army officers, right? These are Turkish army officers who were sort of put into the Robert College to learn English, right? Because they're thinking after the war, right? They're thinking after the war. And in 43, it could go either way, but it seemed pretty clear that the Germans were going to lose, right? And the Russians were going to, Americans. And so Turkey is moving closer and closer to the West, in this case, Britain, but also looking ahead to Russia, the United States. So this person, his presence in this graduation picture is, of course, highly symbolic, right? And these chaps are, unfortunately, see this, they're holding sort of what looks like a diploma, but it's not, it's a certificate of English. Okay, comparisons, no figures among the graduates of SBC comparable to Georgi Zeydan, Philip Hitti, Konstantin Zurek, Zeyn, or Asad Rustum. SBC is seen as a major factor in the rise of Arab nationalism, but after 1920, after the Kemalist Republic, after 1920, AUB becomes secular and RC becomes much more influential after it becomes Boğaziçi University, University of the Bosphorus. We have a tradition in both universities of student protest and political engagement. This is the book written by one of the members of faculty here, Makram Rabah, A Campus of War, about the Civil War here. And the picture on the left is what's been happening in my old home institution since 2005. Let me explain this a bit. In 1992, we at Boğaziçi held our first election for president. This was a pirate election, actually, but it was also at a time when there was a sort of shift was moving from military rule, because there had been military coup, but by 1992, the transition to civilian government was pretty much on the way, and the political atmosphere was suitable, so we held this election. The movement initiated by Boğaziçi University was taken up by other universities and became law that same year, right? So for 22 years, Turkish public universities elected their presidents, and the faculty elected their deans, and the departments elected their chair, and so on. This photograph, this gentleman is our first elected president, Professor Üstün Ergüler, a professor of political science. In 2014, as part of the authoritarian regime, this was changed. All university presidents are appointed today by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. In January 2015, Melih Bulu was appointed president. He's replaced after 6 months by Naci İnci. There were mass student protests. When I mean mass, I mean hundreds of students protested. Faculty protested. We were #1 item news in Turkish press and foreign news for quite a while. And very striking scenes like this were seen. The police actually handcuffed the gates of one of our campuses to keep the students in, right? Because they wanted to go out onto the street and protest. So they put handcuffs on the gate. And well, luckily, nobody was seriously hurt. The students managed to stay comparatively calm during this occasion, and but it was a very big deal. Scenes like this were a daily occurrence. Massive police presence outside the university gates. And also scenes like this young woman, it's a shame this contrast is not good, there's too much light, but she actually has the courage to smile while she's being taken away. Okay, so since January 2015, every day faculty keep a vigil in front of the rectorate building between 12:15 and 12:30 every day. The vigil is kept in all weathers. You can see that, well, here you can't because the contrast is no good, but it's actually snowing. Wearing their academic robes, I should say we, because I participated very often when I was there, turn our backs on the rectorate, bearing posters declaring, this is the 500th anniversary. The signs read, we want a free, autonomous, democratic university. We do not accept, and we do not give up. Today is the 545th day of the vigil, and we're looking forward to our national elections, which will take place in about 2 months. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Selim. I mean, UB looks much more democratic in its past, but now we see the opposite. I mean,
you said it, not me.
Yeah, your president is elected by faculty. Ours is appointed by the BOT. I mean, I think it's a very interesting the dynamic that how Turkey succeed since the 70s to elect its academic core, and we don't. So I open the floor for yeah, please. Hala, can you give him now?
The speed, it's over there.
Yeah.
All right.
See if I can. Can you use that one?
No problem.
Because of the Zoom.
All right, no problem. Thank you very much, Selim, for this very interesting talk. I would like, well, a number of questions came to my mind, but firstly, I would like to ask you to elaborate more on the intervention by the Turkish government in appointing the president of Boğaziçi University, we were following those events, and I had a number of Turkish friends from Istanbul who shared with us those events at that day when it was intervention in the freedom of the university. Could you elaborate more, and what happened later on? Whether the university succeeded in actually emphasizing its role in appointing presidents and probably high-ranking administrators in the university, or the Turkish government, I mean, insisted, and then that actually quarrel ended in what? What type of solution there was?
Question we will collect any question from the Zoom. See if there is anyone if there is a hand. Tariq?
Yeah, Selim.
Yeah, please, you need for the Zoom. Sorry.
Selim, thank you for the talk. You mentioned the limited number of Turks within Robert College, and gave examples of Armenians and others. Were these Turkish Armenians? Do you mean people who were Turkish speakers or citizens of the new republic? Because it would seem that you are saying that these were not actually citizens of the republic and someone else. Is that a misunderstanding on my part?
Satani, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I have a couple of questions, some just factual. I always wondered why Robert College was called Robert College. I don't know if you mentioned it, but who was Robert and why was it called Robert College? But that's just a minor issue. My two questions have to do with the question that you posed about what kind of graduates were these universities attempting to forge or to create, and what was the notion? Was there a notion of the citizen? Were they trying to create citizens the way national public universities attempt to create a citizen? And what kind of citizen did they envision, if your sources enable you to answer that? And I wondered in relation to this, about the high schools that were founded as feeders into these university systems. So Robert College became a high school, or the name of the high school, and IC International College here in Beirut became the feeder into AUB. And so whatever kind of graduate these universities are trying to create, the high schools begin this work earlier, actually. I know that it's not only the graduates of these high schools who end up in the university, but these are feeder high schools. And I was wondering, when in Turkey, in Republican Turkey, did it become acceptable to send children to these foreign high schools? Because I know there's a German high school, Austrian, French, American, etc. So when did this form of education become acceptable for middle class and upper class Turks? And the other question, again related to the kind of citizen or the kind of graduate, has to do with secularization. So I would love if you could expand a bit on the secularization project or process in these two institutions, because the contexts are so different. So the Turkish Republic, when it's formed, is a secular republic. And so the universities automatically become secular, or I know there is a struggle around education and secular education and so on in Turkey. But of course, in Lebanon, the context is not one of secularism, but the university chooses a kind of secular path. And I know Osama Maqdisi has written on this concerning AUB. So I'm, and you mentioned in the earlier years about, the struggle over teaching Protestantism and Christianity and so on, but then what happens slightly later. And just on a note on this, my father attended AUB medical school from 1940 to 47, and he once told me that Muslim students had to go to church on Sunday, but Jewish students did not have to go to church. So even in the 40s, there was some form, if what he said was true, and I think it was, you know, there was still some form of Christian teaching or socialization that was taking place at AUB. Thank you.
Thank you, Selim. Can we continue? Umat, Azer?
Well, greetings from Istanbul, from the campus of Istanbul Technical University, not too far from Boğaziçi University. Thank you for a great talk, Professor Deringil. If I may, when you say, well, AUB had very distinguished alumni like Jorge Zaidan or Philip Hitti, whereas Boğaziçi did not. When do you mean that? I mean, do you mean historians? Do you mean intellectuals? Or does that apply more for the earlier period? Because later on, obviously, we have a lot of scholars who are graduates of Boğaziçi who became scholars in Turkey and abroad, all around the world. And also, what kind of influence do you think Boğaziçi alumni have, say, in politics? Of course, we can remember Tansu Çiller, the only woman prime minister in Turkey, was a graduate of Boğaziçi. But also in the bureaucracy, do you see many Boğaziçi graduates there in Turkey or elsewhere? Thank you.
Yeah, just a question from my side. I was really intrigued that the number of Muslims in the early 20th century was 128 from 800, while you have 88 Jews. I mean, why there is, if you like, over representation of Jewish community at AUB compared to the Muslims? I mean, just I'm intrigued by this. If you have any answer to that, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, please.
Okay, I'll start with Johannes. Well, the struggle goes on. One of the most controversial things that the second appointed president did was he created top-down two new faculties, right? The Faculty of Communication Studies and the Faculty of Law. These have no students. They are now bringing in from the outside people to teach in these faculties. The idea is very clearly to create some sort of cadre that will be loyal to the regime. The other thing is the deans of all of the faculties, which were the elected deans, were dismissed. The elected deans were dismissed, and deans were appointed by the president. These people were from the outside. They're not any. None of them in all four faculties. None of them are Boğaziçi faculty. They are just brought in from the outside. Okay. In terms of student protests has sort of died out actually, but our students were very brutally treated. They were beaten up. They put these clamps on your feet, right? It's like handcuffs, but they're on your feet, and you have to go everywhere with it. It's just absolutely horrible, right? But we had a lot of sympathy from the population at large. People were saying, what is this? And these are the most brilliant kids in this country. What are you doing to them, right? I mean, taxi drivers would tell you this. Conservative people, right? I mean, people would say that I pray 5 times a day or whatever. I fast, but what is this? I mean, this is not acceptable. Okay, so that is it's a continuing story. Now, what's going to happen with the elections, we don't know. Everybody's looking to that. Tarek, you made a very good point. Now, Armenians, Bulgarians, Greeks, and Turks, if you wish. These were all of you. Your point is well taken. These were all, officially speaking, Ottoman citizens, right? They were Ottoman citizens, right? But it's very interesting. You made me think about this again. The fact that they were all Ottoman citizens made very little difference to the administration. The administration categorized them ethnically, right? The administration chose to see them ethnically, right? And that, of course, changed completely with the Republican period, because as far as the Republic was concerned, these people were simply Turkish citizens, right? The fact that, there weren't all that many Armenians left after the Republic was established, but you still had, in the 1950s, 1960s, you would probably find in Robert College an overrepresentation in their sample of non-Muslim students. And of course, Istanbul being Istanbul, that's another one of the reasons. I mean, here, AUB or rather Syria Protestant College was a big fish in a relatively small pond. Whereas in Istanbul, you have the Imperial Lycée of Galatasaray, you have Istanbul University, you have all these other options that people could send their kids to, right? But nonetheless, it had a very serious impact. But that's a very, very good point, and I should have brought that out. I mean, they were officially, at least, Ottoman citizens. Satani, Robert College, why? Very simple. I showed a slide of George Robert, who became the main financier, financial backer of Robert College, I think from 1873 onwards. And so Cyrus Hamlin, before that, was struggling to keep the place going. He was a very remarkable man, Cyrus Hamlin, actually. He actually made money for the college washing the uniforms of the British Army during the Crimean War, baking bread for them, and so on. It was a very interesting guy. So then, when Robert sort of adopted the institution, money was no longer a problem. What kind of graduate? Interesting, and I still haven't got an answer for that. But they obviously, you see, George Washburn was very different to Cyrus Hamlin. George Washburn actually felt that they were foreigners in Turkey, right? In the Ottoman Empire. Hamlin did not. Hamlin felt part of the society. And by the way, George Washburn was his son-in-law, and they hated each other. Okay, so there's also this sort of dynamic going on. Was there a notion of citizenship? In Ottoman times, officially, as I said, there was an Ottoman citizenship law since 1869. There was definitely a notion, but there was also the time of nationalism, burgeoning nationalism. I mean, the leading cadres of the Bulgarian nationalist movement were trained in Robert College, right? So that's also a fact. High schools, when did it become acceptable to send your kids to foreign schools? Well, during the Hamidian period, they actually tried to ban it. Abdul Hamid actually issued an order saying that it is not allowed to send your kids to foreign schools, but nobody's listened. I mean, Beirut was part of the Ottoman Empire. There's very little they could do about it. There was very little way. There was nothing. There was no real way of enforcing it, right?
Except to close this school.
Except to close the schools, and that, of course, wasn't to suit them because the foreign powers would intervene. The Americans protected Robert College. The Americans protected here. The French protected Saint Joseph. So it wasn't actually bad. So what happened after 1924? That's the interesting thing. They didn't close them down. They didn't actually nationalize them as such, but they clamped down on them. One thing about the IC, Satane, if I'm not mistaken, it's interesting. IC is actually the follow-up of a college in Izmir, in Istanbul, in Izmir, in Turkey, that was actually closed down. It was a Protestant institution in Izmir, and it was closed down, and they moved here and established IC. I'm not 100% sure about this, but I remember reading that. Secularization. Yes, the secularization project. Yeah, I mean, the fact that there was that the name was changed from Syria Protestant College to American University of Beirut, this was discussed in the Board of Trustees, and it was discussed among faculty that now that it's because the French, because it was the mandate, it was French, the French were secular, and so on. So they said it would not be very appropriate to keep the name Protestant. So that's why it became American University of Beirut, right? As far as Turkey is concerned, interestingly enough, it retained the name of Robert College until 1970, right? In 1970, it wasn't actually nationalized. This is, people think that, you know, the Turks, the Turkish state nationalized it. No, the Americans were going to pull out anyway. They were losing money, and the Board of Trustees in New York said, sorry, we can't sustain you anymore. And they were going to sell up and move on. So actually a very interesting move to take place at that time. The founding rector of Boğaziçi University, Abdullah Quran, and others organized, with American help, of course, that this land, this amazingly precious real estate, would be given as a donation to the Turkish state, right? Together with all of its debts and so on, of course. So it wasn't actually nationalized. About Mr. Özer, right? I'm going to come to it. The faculty profile, the graduate profile of Robert College, then later on Boğaziçi University, was always different, right? I mean, Ankara, the faculty of political science always trained top-level bureaucrats and so on. Boğaziçi was much more business-oriented, right? The engineers, the business school, it was much more, I mean, Koç, one of the great, you know, the sort of leading families, the Koç family, Rahmi Koç is Boğaziçi graduate. Tansu Çiller, the prime minister, the only Turkish prime minister of whom I have to say we're not too proud, was also a Boğaziçi graduate. Again, one of the table of six today, the famous table of six opposition, Ahmet Davutoğlu, was actually my student. Not very good, but you know, we can't record this. You have to erase that. So there is a profile there, definitely a different profile to other Turkish institutions. Definitely. By the way, another very important aspect of this, of course, was this whole issue of secularism. That's part of the struggle going on today. I mean, the new administration is trying to impose, one has to say, a more sort of, I don't like these categorizations or labels, but a more Islamist, as it were, lifestyle on the faculty and on the students and on the institution, which is one of the things that we're protesting against. We have nothing, absolutely nothing against religion, let it be underlined. In fact, we were the only Turkish state university to not have any issue with women with headscarves. In the 1970s, the government issued a decree that women with headscarves would not be allowed onto university campuses, state university campuses. At that time, we deliberately and completely refused to obey this dictum. And it worked. Women with headscarves freely entered Boğaziçi University campus and attended classes. They're forgetting that now. Sorry. You know, it's very interesting. When I was teaching here at AUB and I was also teaching at LAU, students would come up to me, you mean there were Jews in Beirut? You know, yeah, look at the size of the synagogue.
Yeah.
You know,
Abu Jamil, etc. Yeah.
Whatever, and so there was a Jewish community, and by the way, in this protest, they were part of it. They were part of the. It went down in history as the Muslim student protest, but in fact, it was the Muslim and Jewish student protest, because the Muslims were the leaders, if you like, but the Jews also participated in, objecting to obligatory religious education and so on and so forth. So, I think I've pretty much answered all of the questions.
Any other further comment? So in this note, on behalf of Games and DSPA, we would like. Yes. Sorry. Bashar, you have the floor.
Yeah. Yeah, hi, Selim. I mean, you mentioned that the students in Boğaziçi and the faculty were involved in the 2005 and after that protest, but where they were active during the military rule and where Turkish governance was authoritarian, were they involved politically prior to that during the authoritarian regimes in Turkey? Were they involved in any kind of pro-democratic? Sorry. Hello, Selim. Yeah, I think I was muted. Okay.
No, we hear you.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, my question is, you mentioned the protest of the Boğaziçi University students and faculty after 2005 and later, but were they involved in a kind of anti-authoritarian regimes in the past, especially those associated with military rule? Was there a movement strong in Boğaziçi compared to other universities, for example, in Turkey? What kind of political life they had prior to the Erdogan era? And the other question is about nationalization. Of course, it's self-nationalization, not imposed one. But yet it has become a state school, but yet it kept its teaching in English. What were the factors that determined its destiny in that respect? Is it the fact that it had its roots as a private school? Is it the fact that it teach in English, continue to do so, that gave it a kind of distinguishable flavor and maintain it as an elite university, or it lost that status as an elite university, elite academically, I mean, not socially and economically? So because it's interesting to compare these twins, how they progressed, that one became a state school and the other remained a private school, how you compare the trajectory of those two histories. So thank you if you can help answering this question. Thanks.
Sure. Actually, in the very turbulent days of the military regime, our campus remained relatively peaceful, I have to say. When I joined the faculty in 1977, there were sort of tit-for-tat killings happening every day between the right and the left. On our campus, we had everybody. We had the right-wingers, I mean, not the actual fascists who went out, who were the grey wolves or whatever, but we had, seriously committed right-wing students, Muslim committed right-wing students. We had Maoists, we had Stalinists, we had everybody. But it was a relatively peaceful campus. I mean, I say relatively because nowhere was peaceful in those years. But we had nothing like the sort of armed shootings that was going on in Middle East Technical University in Ankara, for example, which, by the way, was also set up as supposed to be a stronghold of pro-American engineers, right? Turned out to be the flagship of the Turkish left. We didn't have anything like that. It was a relatively peaceful campus, largely because of this tradition of tolerance, I have to say. People would shout at each other, but they would not hit each other. And so, yeah, but, students from Boğaziçi did participate in, mass demonstrations or protests or whatever. They were arrested and tortured, but the campus itself remained relatively peaceful. About English education, this, of course, is one of the things that people always hit us over the head with, saying, what kind of Turkish university are you? You teach in English and so on. Of course, this was in the 1970s, 80s. Now, every single private university that's established in Turkey teaches in English, right? Because it's a cool thing to do. So, yeah, this is an issue. But to this day, interestingly enough, in Turkey, the country at large, I've had people, when I was going to the archives in Istanbul, colleagues from Istanbul University, would come up to me and say, you are still a missionary school, aren't you? I said, no, we haven't been a missionary school for a long time. But there was always the stigma that we somehow were different. We somehow did not belong. And I say, we're actually quite proud of that. And that's why we're being attacked right now. I hope that answers your question.
With that note, I will.
Somebody else, Samir Duvan? No, okay.
No. Thank you so much for your attendance and hopefully to see you in other talks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Selim. It was a pleasure.
Very interesting.
You,